Prisoners are finding themselves locked away for up to 23 hours a day inside cells. We would normally expect prisoners to be spending somewhere in the region of 10 hours outside of cell, engaged in activities, education, training, work. So it's been well documented in recent months that prison conditions have not been as good as they should have been. We've seen a marked deterioration in conditions as described in official inspection reports from prisons across the country. A lot of attention has been paid to a rise in the number of prisoners taking their own lives in prison, a rise in self-harm incidents, and that's understandable. We've seen some attention paid to a rise in violent incidents and a rise in the number of bullying incidents reported in prisons. This isn't surprising, but slightly less attention has been paid to the amount of time that's being spent outside of cells by prisoners right now. We would normally expect prisoners to be spending somewhere in the region of 10 hours outside of cell, engaged in activities, education, training, work. But what we are seeing, certainly in some prisons, reports have come back of prisoners spending as little as 1 hour in a 24-hour period outside of their cell, and in that time they have to make phone calls, they have to collect their meals, they have to get showered, and so prisoners are finding themselves locked away for up to 23 hours a day inside cells, unable to access employment, training or education.
Okay.
It's certainly fair to say that some prisons appear to be more able to provide time out of cell than others. As a general rule of thumb, it's going to be happening in the prisons where there are fewer officers than there need to be, and where there are more prisoners than there really ought to be. Because what happens if there's limited space in courses, then some prisons will miss out. Of course, if there aren't enough officers to escort prisoners across the landing down to the classrooms and the workshops, then those prisoners will remain where they were in their cells. And so where we see this problem particularly are in the prisons where there's big overcrowding problems and sharp reductions in the number of staff. What we've seen is over the last 4 or 5 years, the Ministry of Justice has had to make significant cuts. The National Offender Management Service is a body within the Ministry of Justice which is responsible for overseeing the prison service, and they've had to make really big savings. Now, where they've decided to make savings in the prison system is by reducing the number of staff across the piece, and so we've seen prisons having to deal with reductions in officer numbers to the tune of about 40% over the course of 4 years. What that means is that there are fewer officers on the landings, on the wings to supervise prisoners, and this has come at a time when the number of prisoners in the system has gone up, and so what we're seeing is fewer officers per prisoner, and we're seeing a greater demand on officers' time. Now, when there aren't enough officers to look after everyone outside a cell, what happens is that they stay in their cells, and so prisoners have less time out of cell to access the activities that we might expect them to be undertaking. This is a big problem because we put people in prison for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons is for rehabilitation purposes. If prisoners aren't engaged in education, employment, training, they aren't getting the skills they need to better prepare them for life on the outside, and all the evidence points to prisoners who are unable to get employment when they're released from prison are much more likely to return to a life of crime than those who can get into jobs, get into education, and start to turn their lives around. Well, you could employ more officers, which is something that the government has taken on board that it needs to do. Fundamentally, though, I think it's time to have a serious grown-up discussion about who we send to prison and for how long. Prisoner numbers are increasing all the time. We've seen the prison population in England and Wales double in the last 25 years, and what that means is that 3/4 of our men's prisons are overcrowded. They're holding more prisoners than they're designed to. This leads to really bad outcomes for everyone. And so one way of ensuring that prisoners can spend more time out of cell is to reduce the number of prisoners in the first place, so that those who are there, are able to access better activities. That if we spend less money on locking people up, we therefore have more money free to work more appropriately with the people we do lock up. And so we need to give serious consideration to the large number of prisoners in this country who could be better dealt with by way of community punishment.